everyone, and welcome to another English class. In today's lesson, we are going to talk about conditionals. We're going to cover up all the conditionals, the 0, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd, and I'm going to show you how simple they can really be if you know the structure and what they mean. But before we start, let's talk about them first. What is a conditional? Sometimes they are called if clauses. Basically, that means the result of something. The result of something that will happen, the result of something that might happen or might have happened. So let's jump straight into it and let's start with the zero conditional. A zero conditional talks about certainty. Mostly they are scientific facts. If something happens now, the result will happen now. Or if something happens generally, the result will happen generally as well. We also use it to give instructions. The structure of a zero conditional is if plus present simple plus present simple. Just remember that between the two tenses, we always add a comma, and we do that to divide the times. Now, obviously, we don't need to do that here, but when it comes to the first conditional, we always need to put commas between these two tenses for all of the conditionals. Now, let's look at some of the examples. If you heat ice, it melts. This is a scientific fact, so if you heat ice, it really will melt. If you eat too much, you gain weight. And that's true, if you eat too much, you do gain weight. If you touch fire, you get burned. And this is true as well. Now, all of these three examples are real life situations, and two of them are scientific facts. That is because we usually tend to use zero conditionals when we talk about the weather, usually, not always, and if we talk about scientific facts, things that are highly likely, things that are facts that are going to happen 100% and we know it. So this is when we use a zero conditional. However, we also use zero conditionals if we want to give someone instructions. Now let's look at some of the instructions. If you want to meet up, call me before 2 o'clock. This is someone telling someone else to call them before they meet up. They are telling them to do something. In other words, they are giving out an instruction. Let's look at the second example. If you don't know the answer, ask the teacher. So if you don't know the answer, you go ask your teacher. We use a present simple for both of these cases as well. So when we talk about giving instructions, we always use a zero conditional. Another example is, if you see her, tell her I said hi. You see, it's automatic, it's quick, and it's an instruction. Okay, now, sometimes in English exams, you don't always get a sentence starting with if. Sometimes the if is somewhere in the middle. If that happens, then don't panic, it's very easy. What you do is you just switch the structure of the conditional. So in this case, there is not much of a change because we have present simple and present simple. So it would be, for example, you get burned if you touch fire. So what we have done here is simply put this tense first and this tense second. So you get burned if you touch fire, or if you touch fire, you get burned. Now let's have a look at the first conditional. Now, a first conditional is a real possibility. It is something that will happen. However, not immediately, in the future. Okay, so a real possibility or something that is very likely to happen. The structure is if plus present simple plus future simple. Do you remember what's future simple? Future simple is will plus verb. Okay, so I'm gonna write it down. It's will plus verb infinitive. Let's have a look at some of the examples. If I see her, I will tell her you called. Okay, so if I see her, I will tell her you called. this is the future simple part. And if you noticed, we divided both times with a comma. Okay? So the comma should always be between the tenses like we mentioned earlier. Let's continue. If I finish my homework, I will go to your party. So first I will finish, and if I do, I will go. Let's continue. If she studies, you see, in present simple, she will pass the exam. If she studies, she really will pass the exam. Okay? If she doesn't study, she won't pass the exam. So, the negative form of future simple, in other words, negative form of will, is won't. Won't. So we say, if she doesn't study, she won't pass the exam. This is a negative sentence. And yes, you can absolutely change anything you want into a negative form. Just remember, the negative form for present simple is don't or doesn't. And the negative form of future simple is won't, okay? Okay, so let's look at another example. If it snows, we won't go outside. Again, if it snows, we will not go outside. Or if it snows, we won't go outside. So, a very quick revision. A zero conditional is something that will happen, will certainly happen. It's a scientific fact. We also use them to give out instructions, okay? So if you heat ice, it melts. If it rains, the grass gets wet. A first conditional doesn't happen immediately. It needs time. So if something happens now, the result will be in the future. For example, if I see her, I will tell her. If I study, I will pass my exam. If I sleep early, I will feel good the next morning. Okay, so all of these are, I wouldn't say facts, but they are things that are highly likely to happen. They have a high possibility of happening. And a zero conditional and the first conditional have something in common. Have you guessed what it is yet? They are real situations. So a zero conditional is a real situation and a first conditional is a real situation. And now we are going to look at the second and the third conditionals. Now, both of these conditionals are not real situations, okay? So the zero conditional and the first conditional are real, but the second and third conditional is not real, okay? So let's start with the second conditional. What is the second conditional? It's a dream. It's something you wish you had. Okay? It's not a real situation. It's an unreal possibility. The structure is if plus past simple plus the word would plus a verb infinitive. Let's have a look at some of the examples. If he were rich, he would buy a mansion. A mansion is a big house, like a castle-looking, big, beautiful house, okay? So, if he were rich, he would buy a mansion. Where is past simple? We have the word would and the verb infinitive, which is buy. Okay, if he were rich, he would buy a mansion. Now, my question is he rich? No. So, can he buy a mansion? No, at least not yet, okay? Now, let's have a look at the second example. If I spoke, past simple, spoke French, I would, verb infinitive, work in France. If I spoke French, I would work in France. I would study in France, okay? So, my question is, do I speak French? Unfortunately, I don't speak French. So, can I work in France? I don't think so, okay? So, but can I learn French? Can I learn French? Yes. So, in the future, can I still go and work in France? Yes. So, it's not an impossible situation, but for the moment being, it's not real, okay? So let's continue. If she studied, she would pass the exam. If I were you, and notice how I say were for he and for I. This is because when we talk about conditionals, we say if I were you, if he were happy, if she were here. Okay, we use were, we don't use was. So keep that in mind only for conditionals, okay? So if I were you, I would work online, okay? If I were you, I would work online. Good. So these are not real situations, but they are not impossible. So they're not impossible. Now let's look at the third conditional. A third conditional is an impossible situation. Do you know why? This is because we have a friction with time. We cannot go back in time and change things. Okay, so the structure is if plus past perfect plus would have plus past participle. Now, what's a past perfect? A past perfect is had plus past participle. So, all of the verbs in this tense are in the past participle form. Okay, so let's have a look at a few examples. If you had studied more, you would have passed the exam. Notice how we say would have, and past is a regular verb in the past, so we add an ed. If you had studied more, you would have passed the exam. If I hadn't eaten so much, I wouldn't have felt so sick. Okay, now let me explain. If I had not eaten in the past, if I had not eaten so much, I wouldn't have felt so sick. But I ate a lot and therefore I feel sick. Yes, I ate too much and now I don't feel good. Can I go back in time and eat less? I wish I could, but there is no way, okay? So therefore, we have to use a third conditional because it's an impossible situation. Let's continue. If we had taken the car instead of the bus, comma, notice how we put commas for each sentence to divide the two times. So if we had taken the car instead of the bus, we wouldn't have been late to school. But we did not take the car, we took the bus, and so we were late. Therefore, we have to use a third conditional because we cannot go back in time. It already happened. Students always find it difficult to differentiate the second and the third conditional, but the difference is actually very easy. Ask yourself, did it happen? If the answer is no, it's a second conditional because it's a dream. However, if the answer is a yes, then it's a third conditional because it already happened. We cannot go back in time and change it. So we use third conditionals for impossible situations and second conditionals for dreams. Now, what if in the exam, the sentence doesn't start with if? Again, don't panic. All you have to do is put this tense second and this tense first. For example, let's look at the second example. If I spoke French, I would work in France. Now, in the exam, they could switch the structure because this is what we do in English. We don't always follow the structure. Sometimes we switch things around, but the meaning remains the same. So, I would work in France if I spoke French. But I don't speak French, so I can't live in France. I can still learn it, but for the moment being, it's not a real situation. However, notice how I changed the structure. I would work in France if I spoke French. She would pass the exam if she studied. I would work online if I were you. All you would have to do is put this tense second and all of this tense first. So all you do is reverse the structure, okay? So, for example, if you had studied more, you would have passed the exam. Or you could say, you would have passed the exam if you had studied more. If I hadn't eaten so much, I wouldn't have felt so sick. Or, I wouldn't have felt so sick if I hadn't eaten so much. You see, all I did was just switch the structure. If we had taken the car instead of the bus, we wouldn't have been late to school. Or, we wouldn't have been late to school if we had taken the car instead of the bus. Now, all of this might seem new and this might be a lot of information for one day. However, the number one step that you need to take is to study your structures very, very well. You have to memorize the structures off by heart and know them like you know your own name. For example, zero conditional, present simple, first conditional, present simple, future simple, second conditional, past simple, would plus verb infinitive, third conditional, past perfect plus would have plus past participle. You have to know the structures off by heart. So that's the first thing you do. You study the structures. The second thing that you do is you know when to use each of them. So each conditional has its own situation. So just to revise very quickly, a zero conditional is when we talk about scientific facts or something that is true. It will happen immediately. A first conditional is also a real situation. However, we use it for something that will happen in the future. A second conditional is a dream, and the third conditional is an impossible situation because something already happened in the past and we can't change it. Thank you for watching this video. If you found it helpful, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel. You can also follow us on Facebook and on Instagram. Thank you and see you in our next video. Bye bye!